Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be continuing on our Python series where we're going to be taking a look at files in Python. And in this particular lecture, I'm going to be teaching you guys 3 distinct file types in Python. The first one is going to be about text files, second is going to be about Json files, and lastly, CSV files. So what we're going to be doing here today is that I'm going to show you guys how to create the file, each file type from scratch, how to write to it, and also retrieve the information, print out the values. And also in the very last bit of the lecture, I'm going to show you guys kind of a small kind of fraction of how we can use files in the scope of data science, which are essentially about the Pandas module. So with that being said, let's get into it. Okay, so after this first comment here, as that served pretty much an introduction to this lecture, we're going to first create a text file. So we'll just write some information to it, and I'm going to show you guys how to, of course, do that. So whether you're creating a text file, a JSON file, or even a CSV file, there's a specific format of writing to a file, or really opening a file, I should say. So the way you do this is essentially you use the with keyword open, and then this is the name of your file that you will pass into. Now consider this, since we are kind of creating this file from scratch, we can name this file whatever we want. So essentially when I was first learning this, I personally thought, okay, I think the file should already exist, correct? Because we're writing the name of it. But don't worry about that. You can essentially just write the name of the file whatever you want. And if you're using Jupyter Notebook, you can find the name of that file appear just all of a sudden because you created that. So just write whatever name of the file you want. I'll just write my file 1. And then since we are going to write to this file, I'm going to say the mode is equal to W. And W is essentially abbreviated as write. Then the next part of this kind of formatting is that we need to say we want to open this file as a certain object. That will make it more easier for us to kind of work with the file. So I'm going to say with open, after all that, I'm going to say open it as, let's just say new file, just to make things simple. Okay, now all we do essentially, since we're using a text file, just write to it using the name of this object. So I'm going to say new file.write, and then just write your essentially message. So you can say, I really, or I should say, I like blue. Let's just say that. I like blue. New file.write, another line of message. And also, almost forgot there, we need to put a new line there. Because what we want to do here is that we want to, when we write to this file, all of our messages to be each separate lines. So it will be formatted more nicer. So then after that, again, I am going to say another thing. So I'm going to say new file.write. I like, let's say I enjoy CS. And then new file.write again. New file.write. I like music. Very random stuff. Okay, after we run that, runs perfectly fine, no errors, so we're doing this all correctly. Now, since we create this file, let's kind of format the output of this file. And before we do that, actually, let me show you guys where this file would be stored if you're using Jupyter Notebook. So we have to search for my file 1. My file 1. Here we go. All right, so my file 1 is right here under so many files there. So my file 1 is here. If I go into that, there you go. So as a text file, you literally create a file that just wrote the text values that you inputted. So you see here, I have I like blue in my first line, I enjoy CS in second line, and then I like music as your third line for your text file. So your file is stored there, and you can find it under those files section of your Jupyter Notebook if you're using that kind of program there. So that's where you can find your file, and then this is the format of the file that we created for the text file. Okay, so now as I showed you guys kind of what the file looked like, let's take the file here that we created and format the output. This is again where we will essentially read the file. So first things first, if I'm going to read the file, the first step I need to do essentially is to change this mode. So I'm going to rewrite pretty much this first half of code, my file 1, and then my mode will be read, as you can say new file again. Now I'm going to essentially print using f-string literals, and what I want to do here is what I'm trying to say in terms of format the output. I'm going to create essentially certain columns of values so that all of these are organized separately. So here's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to say print f, and then in double quotes here, and then in single quotes I'm going to put the name of the kind of columns, the column values that we will separate each of these kind of strings here. So I'm going to separate I in one column, like in one column, blue in one column. So I'll show you guys how that looks like in the end. So I'm going to say print f string literal, and then I'm going to say section 1, and then move this to the left a little bit, let's say 4, and then section 2, and then section 3, and we won't put anything there. Okay, now here's where, okay, you're going to ask, well, yeah, so we know we're going to create 3 different columns here, but how are we going to retrieve these values that we have in our text file here from the file itself, correct? We want to take these values in this text file and separate them out. So we need to create a for loop. So I'm going to say for items in new file, and then I'm going to essentially use dot split here to kind of break up these values as distinct string values essentially. So how this is going to look like, I'm going to say object 1, object 2, object 3 is equal to items dot split. So what that's going to do is that it's going to take each of these values here, so for example I, and then like, and then blue, as a list essentially, and then for example if I make object 1, object 2, object 3 equal to this, object 1 in this case will equal I, object 2 will be equal to like, and object 3 will be equal to blue as string values, of course. So when I do that, then I can say print, finally, format this, object 1, and then 4 spaces to the left, object 2, 2 spaces to the left, and then I don't need to say anything here, so I just put object 3. And obviously let me put that. There you go. Okay, so a little bit formatted not so nicely there. So as you guys saw, essentially the format of the kind of output was not very nice. So I just kind of manipulated these numbers here, and I changed the names just to kind of really emphasize the spacing here. So now as you can see, first you see here that each of the I objects are distinct, correct? Second is all of these kind of adjectives. And then third is kind of the objects, what we're talking about here. So again, essentially what I did here was that I formatted and used spacing to kind of show you guys that we could essentially take each of these as distinct values and format them however we want it. Cool. Okay, so now that we kind of dived a little bit deep into text files, let's shift into using JSON files. So this is a module library that we need to import. So you saw with text files, I automatically just opened the text file, created a text file, and then wrote to it and then read it. But in here, first thing we need to do is import JSON. Now, in order to write to this file, we will use a particular method. So we need to use the .dump method to really kind of write to the file here. However, it's the same format whether you're using JSON files or in the next kind of section here where we'll take a look at CSV files, you use the same formatting. So we're going to say with open, and then my file2.json, and then keep in mind that in this kind of file here that we created, a text file, I didn't really write anything. I should have said .txt, but with JSON files, just keep in mind that, and with CSV files, we need to write the file type. next to the name. So .json mode is equal to w, which is right, as the object we want to kind of work with this. So we'll say file2. Okay, so as I mentioned, what we need to do in order to write to this file, we will use a particular method. Now, I want to emphasize that with JSON files, it's not going to be like this text file that we created here where we use string values. In fact, JSON files are unique in that you essentially write the code into that file. So for example, right, let's just say something very simple here. I say, okay, I create a list of values. My list is equal to blue, CS, and then let's just say red. So with JSON files, what they're going to do when we write to this file, we're going to take this piece of code as it is basically into a file, which I will just do this, json.dump, and then the name of the piece of code we want, the object of the code, my list, and then the object we kind of are using it as, the file as, and we use file2. We run that, and then let's go into our notebook here full of so many files. If I can find this, there we go, my file2.json. There you go. So you see here, it's basically writing the code as it is. So this JSON files in general, when you write to it, you're writing the whole piece of code into this file here, which is pretty unique. That is a big difference, of course, between a text file here, as you can see. And then you can also notice here, if you're using string values, in my code here, I said, okay, CS was the only double quotes I used. Blue and red were single quotes. But in your JSON file, they will be always kind of represented as double quotes for strings. So we kind of wrote to that file here. Now also we want to read it. So after writing to it, we want to read the file. So this comment is actually a bit more ahead of what we want to do here, but first thing, if I want to read the file, I can say, as we always use this format with files, 2.mode is equal to read, so R, as file2. And then I'm going to say, I'm going to put an object here. So new file is equal to essentially json.load. So you see here in this comment, later on we'll use a combination of .dumps and .load, but whenever you're going to read a JSON file, you're going to use the .load method. So .load, and then we pass in the object we are using this as, so file2. Okay, then let me input a cell here, so insert cell below. And then if I call my object new file, there you go. You get the output directly of what the file value is. Just to check here, blue, CS, red. When we read the file, we got the correct outputs, blue, CS, and red. Now, as I was talking about this in this comment here, we can read the file in kind of making it more readable, or rather to make the values more readable. So this is where we will use a combination of .dumps and .load. So let me first write out the code, and then we'll go over what this kind of means and what this really shows. So I directly will say print json.load of file2, and then this is where it gets unique. So this indent keyword will kind of essentially, if you saw here, this indent keyword is going to break up these braces, these brackets I should say, to make these blue, CS, and red values more readable, more emphasized. So let's say indent is equal to 4, just as a random value. If we do that, this is your output. So you see here, these brackets here are pushed all the way to the left, and then in the middle here is all your values, blue, CS, and red. And it does make it more readable. If you see here, you don't have to worry about the brackets, or essentially all you're focusing on are just the blue, CS, and red strings that we put here. So if I, for example, put indent 20, so you get farther to the right, I should say, and you all focus on just these middle values here. So just a kind of fun way to work with JSON files to make your outputs more readable. You can kind of use a combination of .dumps and .load in this kind of perspective. Now, lastly, we're going to take a look at CSV files. and how to, of course, write to them. So CSV files are known as comma-separated values, which is why they're called CSV. And it's like JSON files, we need to import them for use. So I need to say import CSV, and then in order to write to this file, my file3, we need to use the same formatting. And then keep in mind, do the file type after the name of the file you write in. So .csv, mode is equal to write, and then as new file3. Now, with CSV files, first thing you need to do here is you can create an object. So what I'm going to do here, writer, I'm going to create an object that is equivalent to kind of using the new file that we create here as new file3 to write to the file. So kind of confusing there, but essentially what we're going to do here is, again, we're going to create an object writer, and that's going to be equal to csv.writer of new file. Okay, what this is going to do is that it's going to allow us to use writer, the writer object that we created here, and kind of write the values we want. Kind of like how we, in this text file, we use .write. We use writer.write row, and then blue, red, and then you can also put a number here. Writer.write row, orange, 9, cool, and then writer.write row, nice, 20, interesting. Okay, and forgot to put a comment there. There we go. A big kind of difference you can see here is that compared to text files, as you see, instead of writing the actual values directly, where we said, okay, we just put a string value here, we have to put them in brackets and then separate them by commas. So that's really why they're called comma-separated values, is because they are really separated by commas, as you can see. But essentially in brackets is key that we write them in brackets and then separate them out, of course, as distinct values by using commas. Okay, so I wrote this file as my file3, so let's kind of look into that, see if I can find, there you go. So blue, red 5, orange 9, cool. See, you can see here that they're just the values we inputted there, kind of similar to text files, but of course we're using commas here to separate them out. So that's your CSV file. So that is essentially how you use CSV files to write to them. And lastly, kind of to end this lecture off, I wanted to show you guys how you can use pandas with CSV files. So again, you can really use pandas particularly with CSV files. So if you watch my previous lectures, another module we need to import is pandas. So what we can do here is we can create an object, new frame is equal to essentially pd.readCSV. So you saw here, I'm going to say read CSV, the name of the file that we're kind of putting in here, which is the only file we created as a CSV was my file3. And then just to make things more, I guess, readable, you can also name the columns. So in order to name the columns in your read CSV method for pandas, you use names, and then in brackets you kind of break up the column values however you want. Name them whatever you want. So essentially, since we have 3 distinct values, we will have 3 distinct column values. So you can say just column 1, column 2, and strings, and then column 3, and then new frame. There you go. So just as we wanted, as we formatted in a data frame object here, we kind of said, okay, so we inputted those CSV values of my file3, which we did. We put blue, red, and 5, orange, 9, cool. And then all we did here also was just to name the column values instead of 0, 1, 2, just like these. We said column 1 is one set of values, column 2 is one set of values, column 3 is one set of values. So with that being said, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video helpful, interesting, and of course, I hope you learn more about Python in this lecture. Not only kind of understanding how to utilize text files, but also Json and CSV files, and also kind of a unique application of data science is that you can also use essentially CSV files and input that into a data frame object or into Pandas. So with that being said, guys, thank you so much for watching again. And as always, I will see you in the next one.